I had to give up.
Start, folks, if you like this as a hand.
Right.
Quick announcements before we get on to
Before I hand over to Clive to introduce our speaker for tonight, I have one very important function to perform, which is to give out the parking code. The parking code for tonight is 226806. That's 226806. If you fail to record it, grab me at the end and I promise I will give it to you. Otherwise, we'll be here all night with me repeating it.
Does anyone know off the top of their head what the Deutsch numbers are? 226 and 826? I don't know.
Over to you, Clive.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to this joint function between Schubert Institute UK and Queen's University Art and Music. We have excellent turnout this evening and a number of people online as well, I hope, so welcome one and all. Our speaker this evening probably needs no introduction. He's a very, very distinguished Schubertian. He's been around doing this kind of thing for quite some time, and it'd be very interesting to hear about his reminiscences of Schubert events in the past. From a personal point of view, I've kind of sort of been following Brian around a little bit. Brian gave me the first opportunity to publish something after the Schubert Institute Leeds big conference that we had here in 2000. Yeah, he was obviously so impressed by my paper on scary music songs that he let me publish it, so that was very kind of him. And then, of course, more recently, I've taken over a position that Brian himself once held as chairman of the Schubert Institute UK. So I kind of feel like I'm hanging on to his coattails a little bit. They're very good coattails to hang on to, I'm pleased to say. So I think without further ado, I will pass you over to Professor Brian Newbould.
Thank you, Clive. It's a great pleasure to be with you tonight with friends of university art and music. And because of your interest in art, I'm beginning an artwork. And also, of course, members of the Schubert Institute UK. I feel I have terribly distinguished faces in front of me, and I'm just very careful how I tread. But what you see is Schubert on the left and his friend Vasary on the right. Schubert is looking through a kaleidoscope, and his friend is riding a forerunner of the bicycle known as the Draisine, which was invented by Carl von Drais, a German inventor. The kaleidoscope was invented by Scotsman Sir David Brewster in 1816, was patented in 1817, but unfortunately, before it was patented, the opticians got hold of it and produced thousands of them, and they went all over London and Paris. And one eventually, more than one, of course, finished up in Vienna. Hence, this caricature by Vasary of the two of them, which was published in the Journal of a Nonsense Society, to which Schubert probably belonged, in 1818. So it had finished up in Vienna pretty smartly. Why do I show that? Only because last time I was here giving a talk was quite a few years ago, but I did introduce Schubert's palindrome. There's this remarkable long palindrome in Schubert opera, which I discovered earlier. And a palindrome can be obtained by taking a piece of music and holding a mirror to the right of it and looking in the mirror, and what you will see is this backwards. And in this opera, there is a palindrome. In the Wanderer Fantasy for piano is a mirror image in the other direction. If you hold a mirror there and look into it, what you see, if it's piano music, is that the hands change places, and all music that went down goes up. And I have here on display that passage with, in case anybody missed it on my last visit, that passage at the top, the actual mirror image in the middle, and it corrected to make music of it at the bottom. You have to fiddle with the accidentals, of course, but you can see there probably that this is essentially that, with the hand crossing working the other way round. That's why I show you this, because I believe that Schubert would have worked out, and his friends probably would have helped him dismantle a kaleidoscope to see that it works with mirrors. And I believe that Schubert, who was quite innovative technically, as my latest book is trying to show, would have thought, how can I apply the mirror to music? And he did in two works. He did it in this opera of 1820, and he did it in the Wanderer Fantasy of 1822. But that, for now, is simply an adornment, so I don't hesitate to stand in front of it. Now, I'm also particularly happy to be here because I am in a university music department, which changed my life 45 years ago. From that point forwards, people used to refer to me as a Schubert expert, which was frightening because all I had done was finish an unfinished Schubert symphony. So I've tried to be a bit more of a Schubert expert than that, but I can't promise that I've got very far with it. What I'm going to do today is to talk about my second life since that time when I became a Schubert person. And I'm going to just glimpse back a bit further, only insofar as you might regard it as relevant to what I did later. For instance, at the age of 6, I joined a church choir. I distinctly remember sometime after I joined that I would look at the 4-part music of a hymn, a psalm chant, or an anthem, and I would hear it before anybody had sung a note. And in other words, I had what all musicologists must have, which is an ear. And vice versa, when listening to a piece, I can see it more or less written down and feel it under the fingers. And talking of feeling it under the fingers, I was listening, I suppose I was in my late teens, to choral evensong on Radio 3, if that's what it was called at that time, probably not. And I heard a psalm chant. And I thought, how wonderful and how interesting as a psalm chant. Afterwards, I went to the piano and I played it over to myself, and it stuck. I've never written it down. I've never been able to identify it. And there are probably several people in this room who just might be able to identify it if I play it. So I'm going to play it and ask you, does anybody recognize it? I'd like to know what it is. Does anybody know it? No. Okay. I rather like that, and I still like it. I'm determined to find out what it is, who wrote it. Now, there's nothing much I need to tell you about these early years, except that I went to a grammar school and a university, so I do remember that for the final examination, I had to submit a composition. I wrote a string quartet. I was only a dabbling composer. I'm not a real composer. I'm a pretend composer. And there's a 6-hour paper in orchestration, there's a 6-hour paper in fugue, an audition in conducting, orchestral conducting, and lots of other papers in the viva voce and all that stuff. So I suppose in a way I was prepared for what was going to happen later on. Now imagine a teenage lad, I guess I was 14 or 15, I was walking in my hometown and I came to a second-hand bookshop. And I saw a book which said on it, harmony. I was mad about harmony. Really, I am mad about harmony, I still am. And I looked at the book. It was by one Ebenezer Prof. Now, laughter is just what I would expect. I bought this book, I read it from cover to cover, and I played the music examples so many times because they illustrated so well all the basic harmonic progressions that you might want, really up to, well, perhaps not quite Wagner, but somewhere near. A completely discredited textbook many days ago, but there it was, and that's just an illustration. And if I were to play any little piece that I composed in my teenage years, you would say, oh, yes, he's a real harmony fanatic. So here's one of them. I'm driving. Schubert is a wonderful harmonist, and I was so devoted to harmony. In fact, my first job when I left university was as a tutor in harmony at the Royal Scottish Academy in Glasgow. And for 6 years, I taught harmony to people, some of whom were unwilling, and some of whom were my students at the Royal Scottish Academy, to individuals. Now, that is perhaps relevant to what came later. And the other thing that may be relevant, then I'm going to move forwards to my second one, is that on arrival in Glasgow, I was informed there was a vacancy for an assistant music critic on the Glasgow Herald. And I was encouraged to take it on, so I did. And I went to my first orchestral concert in not one of the big orchestras, but another orchestra, which I said in my review was amateur. I didn't give it a very good review, but after the concert, I went along to the office of the Glasgow Herald. Sub-editor said to me, 100 words by 11 o'clock. There's a typewriter. Now, by the time you've put in the name of the orchestra, the venue, any soloists, the music that was played, that's a good 50 of the 100 gone. So I couldn't say very much, but I did refer to it as an amateur orchestra. And there was a letter to the paper from the conductor of this orchestra a few days later pointing out that it was in fact a professional. I thought perhaps that would have been better unsaid, but that was an important thing because I did a lot of reviewing and a lot of writing and occasional articles. And in my subsequent life, the harmony became an interest in Schubert, and the writing became 3 now books and many articles. So it all contributed. But anyway, we'll leave that behind now. Before I go any further, I should say that this event today was going to be a bit of a book launch, among other things. Alas, the publisher is so efficient that the book, my copies, have not arrived yet. 2 weeks after the first volume was published. So all I can do is to say that I bought a number of copies of the flyer which Routledge of New York prepared for me and issued back in February, I think it was. But when you see the horrific price, and it is horrific, bear in mind that there are by now reductions on the internet. So you can probably get it now for something a little bit closer to its true worth. Now, coming forwards, why on earth in 1977 did I finish a symphony left unfinished by Schubert? I did it, honest answer, because my boss asked me to. What do you do if your boss asks you to do something? Well, at the very least you consider it very carefully. So I did. I was by now a university lecturer in music in this very university, but not in this building, because we were then in a place called Chrome Terrace. Some of you will know 2 or 3 little terrace houses in Chrome Terrace. That's where we were, and the boss at the time was Ian Campbell. Ian was a lovely man. Everybody had liked him and admired him. He took me aside one day in April 1977, and he said, "Brian, you know that symphony in E, which Schubert left as a very scanty sketch. Do you think you might look at it? And if you can do anything with it, we could get the students to play it into celebration, department celebration of the 150th anniversary of Schubert's death, 1828-1978. So, immediately that raised three questions. The ethics, finishing something which a composer had, for whatever reason, left aside. Would I do it anyway? The second question. And the third question was, why did Ian ask me? We never discussed that at all, but I can tell you why he asked me. He asked me because at that time I had put all my energy into teaching and done very little research. I produced a paper on Brahms and one on Rose Trio, and that was about it. And I think Ian was very conscious of the need for the departments to be researching and publishing, and he saw me as somebody who needed to be goaded a little bit, so he came up with this idea. That I'm quite sure is why he asked me. Perhaps he also thought I could do it. Well, anyway, he got hold of a copy. It arrived. And that was the first page of the symphony. That's what I saw. Adagio, Symphony, August 1821. Schubert, MPIA, short for Manu Propria, by his own hand. And as you see, he composed directly into orchestral score, 14 staves. At that time, the upper strings were at the top, violins 1, 2, violas, cellos and basses, bottom 2, and then woodwind, brass, timpani, lower strings. So the third one up is the timpani. I'll try to remember later, and if not, you can ask me why on earth it says South Kensington Royal College of Music. There is a story there. So that was the first page I saw. "35 minutes later, he had used up a large quantity of orchestral paper to write 4 movements. This is the end of the 4th movement. Bine. How decisive is that? Bine. And look at these, it's double bar. And all he's given us is the first violins up at the top. 2/3 of the symphony. He wrote fully the first 110 bars, Adagio and the Allegro, up to what we call the caesura before the second subject. And then he decided he got to speed up, and he couldn't keep up with the rate of his composing by writing for the whole orchestra. So, in order to accelerate his job, 2/3 of the symphony consist of a single line, like that page. Of the finale, when he seemed to be racing even more, 90% of the finale is a single line only. Well, that is the beginning of the slow movement. And you see for each movement, he worked out all the instruments and their keys that he would need for this A major andante. And you might be puzzled as to why you see a negative there. The copy which Ian got from me was entirely negative, like that. So you just have to get used to thinking in negative terms. Now, lovely little theme at the beginning there. Here we are. Now, if you ask somebody who's hardly had any lessons in harmony at all, what you do with that, they would say, well, that's a tonic chord, that's a dominant chord, the tonic, the dominant, the tonic, the dominant, the tonic, the dominant, the tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. What I decided to do with this was to underpin it with a tonic pedal. The pedal stays there, and those changes of harmony, therefore, are gently felt above. And this, I think, makes it more in character of a Schubert andante. It is, note, a phrase of 5 half bars. Da, 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 da. Schubert often did this, and I have a chapter in my latest book about his habit of doing that in certain works. In fact, that phrase structure applies to themes in 3 of the movements of this symphony of 1821. Now, with luck, we shall hear this on here. Let's see what happens. That's not what I wanted. And I'm not even going to talk about Brahms. Let's try this. Now, here is a passage of the sketch. This is a sketch, but I have done it for you in modern notation so that you can see very clearly. I don't know, we might not see it very clearly at the back, but anyway. That is this passage as you wrote it. This represents 2 pages of the sketch. The first page ends there. When I turned the page at that point, that is what confronted me. That is the end of the second subject in the recap of the first movement. What you see there is a little rising figure, da-dee-da-dum, da-da-dee-dum, with its mirror version underneath, da-da-dee-dum, da-da-dee-dum. And then a little rhythmic imitation with a rhythm from the first theme, the Queen violas and flutes. We've now got modern layout of the score, of course. And then when it comes to the end of the page, the last bar of the page, we see da-da, and that very pregnant slur across the end of the page, and da-da-da on a low G. Then you turn the page, and all you see is this scrubbing of the first line. The first thing to do is to work out that that high G sharp in the first violins is going to be what we call a cadentia 6/4 in E major. Because we're going straight back to E major. So, what do? Obviously, that is the beginning of this. So you do that in its inversion in the violas, and you build that up along here, noting the crescendo up to a forte, and then comes the big decision. The critical thing is the movement of the bass. Always in harmony, the bass matters, particularly. No, G, 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 destination, B in the bass there. The answer for me was the stepping bass. I have a chapter in a new book called The Stepping Bass, and it talks about many composers as well as Schubert. But if you can remember the first movement of the unfinished symphony, beginning of the development, da 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 dee, da 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 da, to the bottom note there. That note is sustained and gradually it rises a semitone at a time over many bars towards the climax. So my answer was semitonally rising from G natural up to the B natural that we need there. With luck, this will be the passage. Oh no. End of the slow movement. Schubert chose the two clarinets and thirds. And how's this for a Schubert modulation? And it was a great pleasure to complete this little coda. His most beautiful slow movements. Now here's this passage, I hope. Now, when I saw this sketch, I was quite amazed by it. I didn't think that Schubert could work like this. And I felt exactly as somebody else before me had felt about it. This person wrote about it like this. It seems as if I saw him there, working in his room. It seems as if, through the very incompleteness of the work, the scattered, half-finished indications, I became at once personally acquainted with your brother. more closely than I should have done through a complete piece. That's just as I felt. I felt as I went through this that I was seeing much more of the workings of Schubert, what he considered essential, what he could leave to later when he would come back and finish it. So a very moving experience. Why didn't he come back and finish it? Because, and perhaps this is why he was racing through the finale, which is so much single line, because he had an appointment with his friend Franz Schubert, the librettist, to go into the country and to work on a new opera, Alfonso and Estrella, which took him over 3 months. By the time he finished that, Schubert would not come back and finish a symphony that he left that long ago. In any case, he was probably already thinking of the unfinished, which followed soon afterwards. I eventually was so excited by this project, particularly to see Schubert moving forwards from the style of the last of the early symphonies, number 6, towards what was to happen in the unfinished and the great C major. And I thought to myself, orchestras don't play sketches. This music is going to be unheard. People who don't read music, though they may be great Schubert enthusiasts who would like to know what Schubert tried in this symphony, would never hear it unless it's finished. So I said to Ian, eventually, I will take it on. He said, would you like to conduct it? I said, no, I wouldn't. I'll tell you why, because if I'm going to take this on, it's some risk, and I want to, the first time I hear it, it must be performance ready. That's the only way I can judge whether I've done it as I want to do it. If I come along to rehearsals or rehearse it myself, you know, I'm never going to get that sort of impression straight off. I'd rather have my mind crept away from it. Would you do it? And Ian said, yes, I'll conduct it, and he did. What he didn't, it went very well. And what Ian didn't tell me was that he'd asked 2 Schubert experts from the BBC to come to that performance. And the next thing that happened was that the BBC Symphony Orchestra played it 6 months later at the Cheltenham Festival, and another BBC orchestra, about which I'll say something, played it a few months later. Hello. So I had thought, you know, that the first performance being only a domestic performance by students, if it didn't work, end of story. But the press after the Cheltenham performance by the BBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by one David Atherton, we don't hear much of him now, but he was the present conductor of that orchestra. The press reviews were encouraging, and in those days there were such things as music critics attached to all the main papers and the Sundays who would go to Cheltenham to hear a piece like this. And the BBC then told me that they had recorded the concert and sold copies to 26 overseas radio stations. So I thought, right, there's no going back. I'm going to have to accept that this is now going to be in the repertoire. Afterwards, Ian said to me, you know, Dave, that this other symphony has just been identified as having been written in Schubert's last weeks. The 10th Symphony. Surely you're going to have it. So surely I did, and it was premiered. And then Neville Marriner was about to record an album of all the Schubert symphonies, and he said, We're going to do your number 7 and number 10. Surely you do number 8. So, so number 8 followed. Well, I was going to play you, and I will play you, just this one more theme. The slow movement of the 10th Symphony. I don't think. No. What do I do? Do I flick that to the right? What do you want to do? Oh, that was the same passage you've just seen as I fully scored it. But now, this is the third movement of the 10th Symphony. As you'll see, he was now writing in piano score on 2 staves, scherzo, third movement. And in the course of this page, which she scrapped, it became a working page. And what he was working at is here, 2 ways of combining 2 themes together. Dum dum da dum dum da dum 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 dum, etc. And another theme above it. Now that he had worked that out, he started with it again, and he didn't play that trump card until much later in the movement, but he does combine 2 themes in a sort of pre-Brucknerian manner. And this is the end of the slow movement, which consists of 2 pages in piano score, and you'll see that sadly Schubert has crossed out the last bars. I couldn't understand that. That is one of the most beautiful parts of the movement. Really beautiful. So when I was going through the scherzo and deciding that with all its counterpoint, all kinds of counterpoint, I work in that scherzo, which is in 2/4, I decided that it was really a finale, a scherzo finale. Not everybody has agreed with me on that, but I stick to it. I believe it's a scherzo finale. In the middle of it, all sorts of separate bits in that movement. At one point, he stops and thinks, I've had another idea for the slow movement. The slow movement is missing a theme, and he wrote the theme I'm going to play to you, a beautiful major key theme. And I believe that Schubert, having written such a lovely theme, would have wanted to bring it back. It comes in the previous page before this. He would have wanted to bring it back later. And the right place to do it, it had come at the end of the exposition, therefore it should come at the end of the recap, which means it would be part of the coda. So he crossed out the coda in order to rewrite the coda to include that theme. That was my reckoning. And here is this theme, a beautiful theme in F sharp major. The recordings you're hearing so far are all Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. One of my friends said to me, I would like that movement to be the last thing I hear on this earth. I can understand that. Well now, conductors. 3 staff members of this music department, the Leeds University Music Department, have conducted one of my completions. Ian Kemp conducted the 7th. Julian Rushton, whom I am very delighted to see here today, conducted number 10 in the Parkinson Court. And Clive conducted the unfinished, just here in the same room, the Clough Workers' Hall, that the 7th Symphony had its first performance, except that the hall has been turned around between the 2 symphonies. And those performances were all delightful, and it was so good to hear in my own university as it was at that time. Now, in 1977 and 1978, after the BBC Symphony Orchestra, there was to be a performance in Glasgow by the BBC Scottish Orchestra, as it then was. We went up to Glasgow for this concert, which was a lunchtime concert, which was to be recorded for transmission on Radio 3 the following day. The BBC Scottish Orchestra had just appointed a new conductor. His name was Carl Anton Rickenbacker. Maybe I saw a head being shaken. Maybe nobody here remembers that. He was only there for 2 years. I think I know why. Unfortunately, I think we went by train and the train was cancelled or something. We didn't get there until in time for the concert. We rushed in, took our seats for the concert, and sat there listening to the 7th Symphony. I noticed something early on in the symphony, and I started to count. Something else, and so on. After the concert, I went round to see Mr. Rickenbacker. I said, can you tell me why you made 28 changes that I counted to the score of this symphony? He said, it's just not Schubert. So I said, 23 of the 28 changes I counted were changes to what Schubert himself. I said, there was one particularly awful moment in the finale where you used such a bland harmony and I used a strong one. It was awful. And I took out of my bag, because I was prepared for this, I tried to remember to tell you why I was prepared, and I showed him an example of it in a Schubert piano sonata. And he said, why didn't you know anything? Never met the man. He never approached me, he wanted to know anything. So there we are. The producer was with us at this time, the BBC radio producer, and I said, I'm sorry, but I don't think that performance should go out on the BBC. And he said, well, suppose we change that moment you've just complained about in the finale. And eventually I said to them, okay, he argued they couldn't just ditch it. So I said to them, okay, and the following morning they went into the studio and they played the original version of that bit in the finale. We went home, we listened in to the recording the following day, and interestingly enough, yes, they made the change, but at that moment, just for a few bars, you hear the change of acoustic from a concert hall. Then we're on the studio. Interesting. That was with Mr. Rickenbacker. I have never had so much trouble as on that occasion. Neville Marriner, superfine conductor, tends to do things rather fast, but he knows his job very well. He then recorded them all, and then he took number 10 around the northern cities with the Halle, and I followed him around to these performances. And after the first one, I went to see him. He said, how was it? I said, almost perfect, but the first movement just a shade past. Oh, he said, I'll think about it. Then the next one, Sheffield or Bradford, somewhere like that. I went round afterwards and he said to me, how was the tempo first movement? I said, just the same. The next time it's the same again. So he had his view on the tempo, I had mine. The first performance of the Tenth Symphony in the UK was given by York University Orchestra under one Alan George. I asked Alan George if he could get here tonight, but he couldn't. He is a viola player of Fitzwilliam Quartet and he's got a date. He conducted the first performance. He went to Vienna to look at the autograph. He memorized my completion and gave a first-class performance and found the tempo of the first movement just spot on. Charles Mackerras. I love the musician's musician. They all love him, did love him. And it was a pleasure to work with him at the Usher Hall when he recorded number 10 and some of the unfinished fragments which I'd orchestrated from Schubert's piano sketches of the fragments. Now, on one occasion, subsequently, my wife and I, she is here, it's over there, were guests at Harwood House. And there was a dinner after the concert, and there was this ultra long table, and we were at one end of the table with the Countess. The second Countess of Harwood was Patricia Tuckwell, sister of a famous horn player, and Patricia Tuckwell told me during this meal, she said, the subject came round to Mackerras, she said, do you know, when I was a student at the New South Wales Conservatory, I was no good at harmony. You know, Charles Mackerras used to get my exercises for me. So that was the story from Lady Harwood, who was popularly known as Bambi because she was previously a tailor's model in Australia under the name Bambi. Simon Rattle gave a superfine performance of the 10th in Bristol, St. George's, and then took it on tour of various European countries, finishing up in Vienna. I didn't follow it round to those places, but I did hear the story of the Viennese performance. And all I will tell you is that on the morning of the concert, the second clarinetist was ill, and they had to find a period instrument clarinetist in Vienna to stand in. There was none around. They put in a call to London and arranged for a clarinetist to come over as fast as possible. The player did not arrive in time for the afternoon rehearsal, and Annette Isserlis, viola player, therefore stepped up and played the second clarinet part at rehearsal. That's the 10th Symphony of Schubert and the Eroica. And now, if you know anything about the viola and the clarinet, she had to make a double switch, as it were, because the viola plays from a different clef, its own clef, from the clarinet, which uses the treble clef. And also the clarinet is a transposing instrument. Different clef and transposition to be done outside. And I have various members of the orchestra who told me about this and how wonderfully she did it. And apparently at one point, this leading clarinetist, Angela Pay, said to her, try a different reed. Now, in this latest book, I have chapters towards the end about the various completions I've done, and a little bit at the end of each of those chapters about the performance history so far, and the story about that Vienna performance with Rattle is there. A wonderful conductor whose performance in No.7 in Copenhagen is still on YouTube is Andrew Manze. Superb performance. And another good performance I had was conducted by a Hungarian pianist, Tamas Vasary. Tamas Vasary conducted the 10th Symphony. This is way back in the 80s. Very well, and he was such an easy man to talk to before the event. And interestingly enough, next month, Tamas Vasary is conducting the 7th in Budapest. He's taken a long time to get round to the 7th. And he's even older than I am, so there how he's still very active. Finally, I must just tell you about a performance, well, the first recording of the 7th Symphony was done in Berlin with the RIAS, the Radio in the American Sector Orchestra, as it then was in the year 1980. And I was asked to go along, and it was in a church in Dahlem, which is a suburb of Berlin, which Carry-On favoured as the place for recording. And it was a lovely building to record in. All went very well. In Germany, they allowed 5 days to record a symphony. In Britain, 2 or 3 hours. Anyway, it worked well. And I thought, right, I've got a bit of spare time while I'm in Berlin. I'm going over to the eastern sector. Why am I going over to the eastern sector? Because all the Schubert Symphony autograph scores are in Vienna, except No.7, which is in the Royal College of Music, because George Grove, who later became principal of the Royal College, went over with Sullivan to meet Schubert's surviving older brother, Ferdinand. And Ferdinand said, look at this. Here you are, take it. So they took it. George Grove left it on the train at Norwood. The autograph of the 7th Symphony finished up in the lost property and was recovered and is now in the library. But the other symphony that is not in Vienna is the 5th, which has always been known to be in the Staatsbibliothek, the National Library in East Berlin. Da-da-dum-dum-dum, da-da-dum-dum-dum. 5th Symphony. This is the catalogue. Autograph, Deutsche Staatsbibliothek, Berlin. So I walked into the library, having got into East Berlin, which gave me the creeps. An awful lot of goose stepping was going on, and everything was painted red that wasn't black. And I got into the library and I went up to the desk and said, I am a Schubert scholar. May I please see the autograph of Schubert's 5th Symphony? And the lady went and had a little conversation with 2 or 3 people there. Eventually, a man came forward to me and said, do I understand you wish to see the 5th Symphony of Schubert? Yes. He said, would you please go up to the director's office? Go up the staircase there. That is the door of his office. I thought, oh dear, here I am going up to the director's office in East Berlin. What am I in for? I walked in, he said, I understand you wish to see him. He said, it is not here. I said, but surely it is here. No, it is not here. I said, but according to the second edition of the Schubert catalogue, which was published 2 years ago in 1978, it is in your library. It was lost or destroyed in Cigar. Okay, it was lost or destroyed in the war, he said. What could I do? I left the library, and that was it. When I got back, I had a friend who was actually a Franciscan friar. Some of you might have known him. He knew all sorts of things about Schubert and people and up-to-date things. He said, there's a book just about to be published, which is chasing, the author has been chasing a lot of manuscripts which disappeared from that library. Schubert's Fifth Symphony, 2 or 3 Beethoven symphonies, 2 Mozart operas, other works by Mozart, Bach. Great wealth of great music in autograph had disappeared. This man, whose name is Nigel Lewis, wrote a book, and this was the book that was just coming out, Paper Chase. And it seems that what happened was that a bomb fell on Unter den Linden, where the library is, damaged some buildings, narrowly missed this library. But they decided they need to pack up all these valuable manuscripts in crates and ship them out into Silesia, which was then German-owned, the southeast corner of Germany. And there they were stored hidden in Grusau Monastery. The monks became a little bit suspicious because there were labels on the outside of the boxes, but whether the monks played any part in revealing to somebody else what was there, I don't know. But anyway, the Poles, who were rather fed up with what Hitler had been doing to Poland, apparently found them there, and they loaded all these crates onto lorries and took them off Poland. Now, at the beginning of the war, one of the first things Hitler had done was to attack Poland and to attack Krakow, where the Jagiellonian Institute was just being built. Beautiful building. And Hitler thought, that's where all Polish culture really belongs, and I must attack it. So one of the first places he tried to attack, 1939, was that institute. He didn't do much damage. But once the Poles had got hold of this wealth of autographs, they decided they would go to the Jagiellonian Institute as a sort of tit for tat, I suppose. And that's where they are to this day. And I managed to get a copy of the fifth from them when I got home. I'm sorry that I can't tell you more now because I'm out of my time. But if you like to just have a look at this volume, it's a very good read if you're interested. I've got various other copies of things you might have seen on the screen there and things you will not have seen. You're welcome to have a look at them. Also, I have here several copies of the flyer which Routledge produced in about February of my book. So if you wish to take one of those, please do on the way out. Thank you. And this is the end.
We have a few minutes of questions, if anyone would like to ask any.
This is not about musicianship at all, but why then, in that case, do you think the 1978 second edition catalogue was still listing it as in the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin?
Because they didn't know of any alternative, and it was only at this time, just before 1980 really, that it was discovered.
Oh, right.
And it was the Mozart scholars who discovered
Ah,
it. There's so
right.
much Mozart there.
Yeah.
And they discovered it. And this man then did his own
Right.
study. There were works of art as well as music.
Oh, no doubt.
All sorts of things. And they all finished up in the 70s.
They're still there.
Yes. Yes.
Having a trip next.
Next year.
Okay.
Any other questions at all? Okay, well, we'll draw things to a conclusion there.
I would just like to say, on behalf of Schubert UK and all of us here, thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating talk, which mingled entertainment, erudition, knowledge, and fascinating extracts from the outdoor work. I think we will all go away, even those of us who I'm sure know Schubert well, much better informed than we came in. And I'd just like to thank you very much for what I found a thoroughly enjoyable and fascinating lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,